I stood there in the cabin doorway, the scent of rosemary and wood smoke wrapping around me like a memory that refused to die. My son didn't even look up from his wine when he said it. "You ruin every holiday." His wife laughed softly, like cruelty was a form of grace. After raising him through every storm, after paying for the roof above his head and the table he now sits at, I was the unwelcome guest in the home my love had built. That night, I didn't argue. I just memorized every word. And later, I made sure he'd never inherit the warmth he mistook for weakness. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The sky over Vermont was a flat, leaden gray, snow holding its breath. Marilyn adjusted her grip on the pie carrier, stepping carefully across the gravel driveway, dusted with early frost. The cabin loomed ahead, smoke already rising from the stone chimney. She could see them through the wide windows, Rachel laughing with a glass of red wine in hand, David leaning on the kitchen island, Lena placing folded napkins around a long pine table. Marilyn's breath fogged the glass as she pushed open the door. "Hi," she said brightly. Her voice bounced awkwardly against the high beams and quiet conversations. "I brought pies." Rachel turned first. "Oh, you didn't have to," she said, lips tight in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I wanted to." Marilyn held up the pies. Apple with cinnamon streusel and a bourbon pecan. She caught the subtle pause before anyone responded. David nodded vaguely and walked past her to uncork another bottle of wine. Lena stepped forward, took the pies, and smiled. "They smell amazing, Marilyn. Let me warm them up." Marilyn unzipped her coat slowly, reading the room. The fire crackled in the corner. A football game murmured from the living room TV, and something with rosemary filled the air from Rachel's oversized Le Creuset. She moved toward the couch, but Rachel's voice stopped her. "Just a heads up," Rachel said, glancing over her shoulder. "David's on edge. He's had a long week." Marilyn smiled politely. "Of course. I won't be in the way." As the afternoon wore on, Marilyn took her usual place, the quiet middle, not part of the banter, not quite outside of it either. She offered to help, was politely declined. She shared a story about David's obsession with pine cones as a kid, how he'd collect them and line them up like soldiers in the backyard. Rachel chuckled lightly. "Weird." David sighed audibly, setting down his glass. "God," he muttered. "Do we need every childhood story today?" Marilyn blinked. "Sorry, I just thought—" "You always think it's story hour," he said, voice low but pointed. "We're not 10 anymore." The room fell into an uncomfortable stillness. Lena tried to smooth it over. "I think it's sweet. Don't you remember that, Dave?" He didn't answer, just turned and started fiddling with the oven temperature like it had insulted him. Dinner passed in a muted blur of clinking silverware and surface-level chatter. Marilyn complimented the turkey. She asked Lena about her teaching job. No one asked Marilyn anything. Later, as the table was being cleared and Rachel was showing off her new espresso machine, Marilyn ducked into the hallway to grab her scarf from the coat closet. That's when she heard it. A voice just around the corner in the kitchen. David's. "She ruins every holiday," he was saying. "Always has, just sucks the air out of the room." A drawer slammed shut. Marilyn didn't move. Her hand tightened on the closet doorknob. Her heart didn't race. It sank, slow and heavy, like a stone dropped through deep water. Footsteps shuffled. Then Lena's voice, low and tired. "You don't have to be cruel. She doesn't know how to be normal. Everything has to be a moment." Marilyn didn't hear what came next. Her ears buzzed, the hallway suddenly too warm. When she turned, Lena was standing there, just for a second. Their eyes met. Lena's full of something unreadable. Regret, maybe, pity. Neither of them said a word. The drive back was long and silent. Marilyn's hands steady on the wheel. Snow had started to fall, gentle and slow. The windshield wipers swept it away rhythmically. She could still taste the crust of her own pie in her mouth. Rachel had said it was dense and pushed her slice to the side. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't say a single word to herself. But in her mind, something had shifted. And what she saw ahead of her, through the snowfall and the darkness, was no longer a family cabin lit by warm lights. It was something colder, sharper, and she was wide awake. The next morning, the snow had hardened into glass. The roads sparkled, cruel and clean, as Marilyn sat at her kitchen table with a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. The house was quiet. Too quiet, except for the slow tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the soft hum of the furnace coming on and off like a heartbeat she didn't trust anymore. Her reading glasses perched on her nose. She flipped open the thick blue binder labeled Estate and Trust, 2022 Revision. A neat column of typed names stared back at her. David's was at the top. She stared at it for a long time, her pulse steady, her lips pressed thin. There was no storm of emotion left, only a clarity that felt almost medicinal. She reached for the red pen that had rolled halfway across the table. Its click echoed softly in the kitchen. Then, in one clean motion, she drew a thick, deliberate line straight through David E. Wilcox. The ink bled slightly through the paper. She didn't stop. She flipped to the next page, wrote in the margin, what he assumes, and underneath it, neat bullet points. That he'll inherit everything. That I'll stay predictable. That I'll forgive him because I always do. Then, on the next line, in a firmer hand, what I control, every cent, every story he thinks he knows, the ending. A faint smile touched her lips. It wasn't happiness, more like recognition. For years she'd told herself that patience was strength, that silence was grace, but grace had gotten her erased, one polite gesture at a time. The front door creaked open. Marilyn, her oldest friend, Frida James, leaned into the entryway, snow still clinging to her boots. A lifelong smoker turned herbal tea evangelist. Frida had the kind of bluntness that could split stone. Marilyn quickly closed the binder. "You're early?" "Couldn't sleep," Frida said, pulling off her gloves. "Something about the weather makes me nostalgic. Then I thought, nah, I'll come see how you're holding up after that family circus." Marilyn exhaled through her nose. "You heard about that already. Small towns have fast tongues, sweetheart." Frida slid into the chair across from her and eyed the binder. "That looks official." Marilyn hesitated, then opened it again, this time without shame. "It's the trust. I'm reviewing it." Frida's brows rose. "That's your holiday reaction?" "Consider it delayed clarity." Frida leaned back, whistling low. "You've been too generous with that boy for years. He treats you like a charity he forgot he's benefiting from." Marilyn's pen tapped against the margin. "He's my son." "No," Frida said softly, her tone stripped of malice. "He's a PR liability with your last name. There's a difference." Marilyn looked up sharply, then laughed, a brittle, surprising sound. "You're cruel. I'm realistic." They sat in silence for a moment, the kind of silence that feels earned, like both women were measuring how much truth they could handle before noon. Finally, Marilyn said, "He'll still get a gift." Frida tilted her head. "Oh? Just not the kind he expects." The smile that followed was the smallest, most dangerous one Frida had ever seen on her. Outside, a snowplow rumbled by, shaking the window panes. Marilyn closed the binder with a soft thud and reached for her phone. "Who are you calling?" Frida asked. Marilyn scrolled through her contacts until she found the name Clark Hines, Esques, her estate attorney in Montpelier. She hadn't spoken to him in over a year. She pressed call. "Clark, it's Marilyn Wilcox," she said when he answered. Her voice was calm, businesslike. "Yes, it's been a while. I need to schedule an appointment. No, not next month. This week if possible. I'd like to make some adjustments." Frida arched an eyebrow, half proud, half concerned. "You're really doing it," Marilyn nodded. "I've spent enough years being the sentimental fool at the table. Time to be something else." She ended the call and looked out the window at her frozen yard. The trees were coated in ice, branches glittering like fragile glass arms. Frida stood and laid a hand on her shoulder. "You sure you're ready for this?" Marilyn's eyes stayed on the frost-slicked world beyond the glass. "Ready?" she murmured. "No, but I'm finally willing." Her reflection in the window looked unfamiliar, colder, sharper, just like the woman who'd driven home through that snowstorm. And as the grandfather clock ticked toward noon, Marilyn's mind flicked back to David's voice from the night before. "She ruins every holiday." For the first time in her life, She agreed with him, because next time, she wouldn't ruin a holiday. She'd end one. The email came 3 days later. Subject line, Christmas cabin, hope you can join. Marilyn stared at it for a full minute before opening it. The message was short, clipped, clearly composed by Rachel, though it was signed David and Rachel Wilcox. The invitation had the hollow cheerfulness of a corporate memo. We're keeping the tradition going. Same cabin, same dates. Let us know if you can make it. She read it twice. Then, with the same calm she'd used to draw that red line through David's name, she clicked reply. Thanks for letting me know. Wishing you both a wonderful holiday. No argument, no apology, no performance. Just finality. She hovered over send for a moment, considering the enormity of such simplicity. How a single sentence could hold so much unspoken truth. Then clicked. The soft whoosh of her email app sounded almost like relief. By the time she pulled her coat on and stepped into the cold, the sun had climbed over the rooftops of downtown Montpellier, turning the snowbanks gold. The sidewalks were half salted, slick in spots, and she moved carefully through the rhythm of small-town life, the coffee shop doors opening in bursts of cinnamon steam, the postman stamping his feet by the curb, the faint sound of church bells folding into the hum of morning traffic. The law office of Clark Hines and Associates occupied a narrow brick building wedged between a bakery and a bookstore. Inside, the air was warm and faintly metallic, the scent of toner and old carpet mingling with the faint musk of Clark's cologne, the same one he'd worn for the past 15 years. He rose when she entered, a tall man with thinning hair and a voice like an NPR host. Marilyn Wilcox, still punctual as a Swiss train. She smiled faintly. Bad habit, I suppose. They settled into the small conference room, a space lined with legal texts and framed degrees. Clark adjusted his glasses and opened a fresh file folder. You said on the phone you wanted to discuss adjustments to your trust. Marilyn nodded, sliding the blue binder toward him. Yes, but not the kind that require rebuilding. I'd like to keep the structure exactly as is. He glanced over the documents, brow furrowing slightly. So, no change in distribution percentages, trusteeship, or beneficiaries. Not exactly, she leaned forward, her tone even, deliberate. I want to keep the wrapping, but remove the gift. He looked up, startled, then chuckled softly. Ah, so we keep the trust in place, but empty it of assets? Precisely, her lips curved, but it wasn't a smile. Let him unwrap his own entitlement. Clark paused, pen poised above his notes. That's creative. It's fair, she corrected. He spent years taking without asking, assuming that love meant permanence. It doesn't, not anymore. Clark's face softened, that familiar blend of professionalism and human empathy. Marilyn, I have to say, I've seen parents disinherit children before, but usually out of spite or scandal. You sound clear, she finished for him. He nodded slowly. Clear. She sat back in her chair, the faint hum of the heating vent filling the silence between them. I'm not removing the trust. He'll still receive the documentation, the statements, the legal confirmations. It'll all look intact, until he reads the line that says the fund contains exactly $0. Clark exhaled through his nose, equal parts impressed and uneasy. You want that explicitly stated? Yes. Add a clause. As of December 18th, the trust fund balance is $0. I want there to be no confusion. He'll call it vindictive, but I call it educational. He scribbled notes quickly, the scratch of pen on paper sharp and satisfying. You do realize, Marilyn, this will send a very clear message. That's the point, she said softly. Clark leaned back, studying her. You're not the same woman who came to me 5 years ago, crying over a Christmas argument. No, she said, meeting his gaze evenly. That woman thought being quiet was the high road. This one understands the terrain. Outside, the first flakes of new snow began to fall, faint and swirling like ash. When the meeting ended, Clark slid the folder back toward her for review. You'll need to sign once the draft is complete. Should I email or courier? Courier, she said. I prefer paper. It's harder to ignore. She stood, adjusting her scarf, her reflection caught in the frosted window behind him. A woman steady, calm, untouched by the noise of regret. Marilyn, Clark said gently. You sure about this? There's no easy undo. She turned, hand already on the door handle. Good, she said. I'm done undoing things for him. The hallway outside smelled faintly of lemon polish and new beginnings. She walked toward the stairs, each step deliberate, her heels clicking like punctuation marks at the end of a long, unwritten sentence. Halfway down the stairwell, her phone buzzed. A new message. From Lena. He doesn't know about your appointment, but he's furious you didn't reply differently. He said you're being cold. Marilyn stared at the screen for a moment, then locked the phone and kept walking. Cold was fine. Cold preserved things. Cold kept them from rotting. The cafe was quiet, the kind of quiet that happened when December snow muffled the outside world, and the regulars had already claimed their corners. Strings of white lights lined the windows, flickering gently against the glass, and the smell of cinnamon rolls and espresso drifted like a comforter across the room. Marilyn sat in a corner booth, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of chai she wouldn't finish. Her fingers were stiff from the cold, her gloves tucked into the pocket of her wool coat. Across from her sat a small paper bag, folded closed, with a soft burgundy scarf inside. Hand-stitched. Simple. Lena slipped in 5 minutes late, cheeks flushed from the wind, her boots leaving little trails of snow melt across the tile floor. She carried no holiday bags, no faux cheer, just a tired kind of honesty in her eyes. Sorry, she said, shaking the snow from her sleeves. Parking's a mess. No rush, Marilyn replied. I wasn't going anywhere. They ordered nothing more. Lena sipped from a takeaway cup. It smelled like ginger and honey. For a while, they just sat like that. Two women who'd survived the same family but wore it differently. I was waiting for the blowback, Lena said at last, eyes flicking up. After the email, Rachel said you were being passive-aggressive. Dad called it cold, of course. Marilyn nodded but said nothing. Lena leaned in, voice gentler now. But you know what I think? Marilyn's gaze didn't waver. I think you never ruin anything, Lena said. You're the only one who listens, actually listens, and that scares them. The words landed like a hush, soft but irreversible. Marilyn felt something twist in her throat, something like grief, but clearer, like the air after a storm. She didn't respond, not to that. Instead, she reached for the paper bag beside her and placed it on the table. I made this for you, she said, voice quiet. No card, just hands. Lena blinked and pulled the scarf free, fingers gliding over the soft yarn, the subtle texture of stitches layered with care. Deep burgundy, warm and plain. Nothing performative, nothing expensive, just real. Oh, Lena breathed. Her throat caught. You made this. I did. Lena looked down at the scarf in her lap, then back at Marilyn. Her eyes were already shimmering. This is the only gift I'll keep this year. She stood suddenly and stepped around the table. Marilyn rose halfway to meet her, and Lena wrapped her arms around her grandmother, not politely, not gently, but tight. The kind of hug that said, I see what you've done, and I see why. Marilyn held her back, tighter than usual, tighter than ever. When they pulled apart, neither spoke. There was nothing to explain. Outside, the snow had thickened, clinging to the cafe window in blurred spirals. Lena slipped the scarf around her neck with the care of someone dressing in memory. Stay warm, Marilyn said softly. Lena nodded. You too. She left with the scarf tucked into her coat, head held high. She didn't look back. A few minutes later, Frida slid into the now vacant seat across from Marilyn, uninvited but expected. She carried her usual black coffee and unfiltered judgment. Was that Lena? Marilyn nodded. She's good, Frida said, sipping. Clear-eyed. That one doesn't blink at much. No, Marilyn agreed. She doesn't. Frida leaned back, studying her old friend's face. So the bloodline's not entirely bankrupt. Marilyn smiled faintly. Not entirely. They sat in silence, two women older than the world seemed to understand, watching the snow paint the world clean again. Frida finally asked, You gonna tell her about the trust? Marilyn shook her head. Not yet. She deserves a holiday that's hers, not one shadowed by what I've done. Frida raised a brow. Even when what you've done is justice. Even then. They both turned to the window again. Beyond the glass, children pulled sleds across sidewalks, laughing. The kind of joy that didn't come from money or gifts or forced traditions. Just the freedom of feeling safe, even briefly. Inside, the coffee cooled. The lights flickered. And across the street, Marilyn spotted something she didn't expect. David's car. Parked, engine off. No one inside. Just waiting. The envelope arrived 2 days later. Heavy, cream-colored, embossed with Clark Hines and Associates across the flap in raised black ink. The courier handed it over with a polite nod, his boots leaving a pattern of melted snow on Marilyn's entryway tile. She waited until the door closed before she carried it to the kitchen table, the same spot where she'd first crossed David's name out in red. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. Inside were the documents, thick official pages edged with seals and signatures, ribbons of blue ink that whispered final. Each sheet had a faint weight to it, like the past made tangible. The trust looked exactly as it always had. Same title, same format, same legal architecture. The Wilcox Family Living Trust, clear and proud at the top. Beneath it, primary beneficiary, David E. Wilcox. Perfect symmetry until page 6. There, in clean legal phrasing, it declared, Trust Fund Balance, UD2. As of December 18th, assets redistributed per addendum C, private. Marilyn exhaled through her nose, a sound that was neither laughter nor relief. She took up her pen, uncapped it, and began signing. Each signature was slow, deliberate. Not the shaky loops of an aging woman, but the crisp, assertive strokes of someone who had learned that control was its own kind of grace. Clark sat across from her, quiet, respectful, hands folded neatly on his briefcase. Everything is exactly as you requested, he said. Full structure preserved, all assets legally transferred elsewhere. Good, Marilyn murmured, eyes never leaving the page. Let it look whole from the outside. He nodded. We'll file this with the estate registrar Monday morning. Public records will reflect the trust's existence, not its contents. Exactly. The pen glided over the last line. Her name anchored the page like punctuation on a confession. Mel, Clark called over his shoulder. A woman in her 40s appeared, efficient and unflustered. Mel Abbott, notary, witness, and veteran of 1,000 quiet dramas disguised as legal formalities. She affixed the seals with clean precision, the notary stamp pressing down with a satisfying thunk. When she was done, she took her time reviewing the paperwork, her eyes lingering briefly on the 0. Huh, she said, a hint of admiration curling her tone. Null by design, not by mistake. Marilyn looked up at her. That's correct. Mel smiled. You'd be amazed how many people pretend to do this but lose their nerve halfway through. I don't lose nerve, Marilyn said simply. Clark cleared his throat, breaking the moment's intimacy. We'll ensure the trust remains visible in the registry, he said. It'll appear under your name and David's, accessible, verifiable, untouched in structure. To anyone outside the firm, it will look robust. Perfect, Marilyn said. I want him to see his name and feel rich, until the moment he reads the rest. For the first time since she'd walked in, Clark smiled, a small, knowing thing. You've turned estate planning into performance art. Before Marilyn could reply, the conference door opened, and Frida's unmistakable voice carried in before her. Am I late, or are we just finishing the curtain call? Always on time to the good parts, Clark said dryly. Frida sauntered in, sunglasses perched on her head, the scent of cold air and peppermint clinging to her. She picked up one of the duplicate pages, scanning quickly before setting it back down. This, she said, sliding her reading glasses down her nose, is what they call poetic paperwork. Marilyn allowed herself the faintest grin. That's one way to describe it. Frida gestured at the sealed folder. You could have written him a letter, told him how you felt. I already did, Marilyn said, slipping her pen into her purse. He just won't recognize the handwriting. Clark looked between them, half amused, half uneasy. A man who had learned that morality was often just a matter of phrasing. I'll have certified copies sent to your home and your bank, Mrs. Wilcox. Once everything's processed, the change will be official by Thursday. Marilyn rose, smoothing her coat sleeves. Thursday works fine. Outside, the wind had picked up, tossing dry snow across the courthouse square. She paused at the door, glancing back once more at the documents laid out in perfect order on the table. All her years of compromise, all the soft apologies and second chances, reduced to clean lines of ink and law. There was a strange peace in it. Frida followed her out, looping an arm through hers. "You look lighter," she said. "I am," Marilyn replied, "but he won't be." They stepped into the snow. Across the street, a man stood by a black SUV, head bowed as if reading something on his phone. David. The same coat from the cabin. He didn't see them, not yet. Frida's voice dropped low. "You think he's checking the registry already?" "Maybe," Marilyn said. "Let him." The wind caught her hair, white strands lifting against the pale sky. Let him believe the lie a little longer. Marilyn read the subject line twice before closing the laptop. "Can we talk, David?" The question floated in her inbox like a lifeline cast too late. No apology, no context. Just 6 characters and a period, from the man who had once filled her life with ellipses and unfinished sentences. She didn't reply. Instead, she opened a fresh message to Clark, her fingers steady as stone. "Please prepare a disclosure summary upon my passing. No discussion while living." She hit send. No salutation, no sign-off. Then she opened the Wilcox Estate portal, clicked into the Permissions tab, and scrolled until she saw David's name. A gray silhouette, still listed as family contact. She changed the status with one click. No contact, access restricted. Confirm. Yes, she was sure. Her hand hesitated only once, before uploading the final document. Why the trust is empty. It was already signed, already dated. The kind of truth that didn't require a witness, just a woman and her word. The file slid into the digital vault with a quiet finality, time-stamped and sealed. Someday, long after her voice was gone, he'd read it. And maybe then he'd understand that what looked like cruelty had been self-respect wearing steel. The next task was surprisingly harder. She opened the shared calendar they'd used for years. Holidays, birthdays, reminders to call his mother, recipes she used to paste into Thanksgiving week. It was all still there, as if none of it had cracked. Her cursor hovered over December 25th. Dinner, David brings. Wine. Delete. April 12th, his birthday. Book Italian place, leave note on mirror. Delete. Valentine's Day, Memorial Day, their anniversary weekend in Asheville. Delete, delete, delete. Each deletion rang a quiet bell in her mind. Not grief, not even regret. Just space being made. She shut the laptop. Frida didn't knock. She let herself in, dropped her coat on the hook, and held out 2 coffee cups like an offering. Too early for whiskey, but not for espresso. Marilyn took hers. "What are we celebrating?" Frida grinned, pulled something small from her pocket. A party horn, absurd and rainbow-colored. She blew into it until it squealed, earning a reluctant laugh. "To 0 balances and 0 guilt," she declared, lifting her coffee. Marilyn clinked hers in return. "I'll toast to that." They sat on the sun-warmed porch in matching chairs, mugs between their palms. The fall air was sharp and clean, rustling through the last leaves on the oaks. Down the road, kids shrieked as they kicked through a pile of golden red. A dog barked once, then went quiet again. "You know," Frida said after a moment, "some people would have just blocked his number and moved on." "I did something better," Marilyn said. Frida raised a brow. "I planned." That got a smile. "You really think he'll try again?" Frida asked. "He already has," Marilyn murmured. "That email, that was bait. He wants to rewrite the ending." Frida shook her head. "He doesn't get to write anything anymore. You close the book." Marilyn looked out at the driveway. The mailbox flag was down. Nothing incoming. Good. "I just didn't want the conversation," she said, softer now. "Not because I don't have things to say, but because I've already said them to myself 1,000 times. Said them and answered them and outgrew them." "Then he doesn't deserve the new version of you," Frida said, matter of fact. "No," Marilyn said. "He doesn't." The wind shifted, cooler now. Marilyn tugged the sleeves of her cardigan down to her wrists and sipped the last of the lukewarm coffee. The porch light clicked on, sensing dusk before either of them had noticed it creeping in. Frida leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "So what now?" Marilyn didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced at her phone, not out of habit, but to make sure it was still on Do Not Disturb, still silent, still hers. Then she said, "Now, I wait." "For what?" Marilyn smiled. "For him to realize I never needed a reply to end the conversation." They sat in silence, the kind of peace that doesn't have to prove itself. Then Marilyn's phone buzzed. Once, twice, not a text, a calendar alert, one she hadn't created. She stared at it. Wilcox Trust, external access request approved. User, D. Wilcox. She held up the screen to Frida, voice flat. "He's in." Frida leaned in, reading it twice before speaking. "Well," she said, her tone tightening. "Let's see what he does when he opens a treasure chest and finds nothing but air." But Marilyn didn't reply. She was already opening the document history, and there, at the top, was the sign she didn't expect. "Why the trust is empty. Downloaded. Opened. Forwarded." Not to a lawyer, not to a sibling, but to Amy Caldwell. Her blood ran cold. She hadn't heard that name in over 10 years. Not since the lake house. The voicemail came at 3:42 a.m. Marilyn didn't hear it until morning, when the quiet ding of her phone finally echoed through the kitchen as she poured herself coffee. She didn't open it right away. The sender ID was unmistakable. David Wilcox. No text, no follow-up. Just a single file, 37 seconds long. She set down the mug without tasting it, walked back to her desk, and opened her folder marked Behavioral Patterns, Archive A. It already held screenshots of past messages, a notarized record of the bank withdrawal, a PDF copy of the deleted calendar events, each artifact labeled and dated like it belonged in evidence, not memory. She clicked Save As, renamed the voicemail, 3:42 a.m., voicemail D. Wilcox, unprompted. Wave location, behavioral patterns, escalations. Only then did she allow herself to listen. "I don't know what you think you're proving here, but it's petty, Marilyn. You're rewriting history like none of it mattered. Like we didn't build a life. I gave you everything. You were everything. And now you're punishing me for the parts you didn't like? That's not justice. That's cruelty. And if you think people won't see through this, you're wrong. This isn't you. I don't even know who you've become." Click. No threats. No profanity. Just that weary, manufactured ache, like he'd tripped over his own guilt and called it grief. She played it twice more, noting the inflections, the shift in tone at everything. The slight slur toward the end, like he'd had a drink to work up the courage. Then she emailed the file to Clark with the subject line, Supplemental Evidence, Voicemail. OCT 11 he called within the hour. "This makes the case airtight," Clark said. "Consent removed, paper trail intact. If he tries anything, contesting, interference, backdoor access, we have proof of emotional manipulation and pattern escalation. Judges don't like this kind of tone." Marilyn didn't say much. She just sat by the window, watching a neighbor rake leaves into precise lines. Yellow, brown, gold. Order restored, one drag at a time. "I've drafted the updated power of attorney," Clark continued. "It revokes David's rights entirely. Reassignment to the independent fiduciary begins Friday." "Good," she said, still watching the rake move in deliberate rows. "Send me the sign-off." Next came the insurance logins. She hadn't touched those in years. Policies with clauses and contingencies that once made sense back when her name and David's were still written in tandem on everything from dinner RSVPs to the deed on the cabin. Now, one by one, she removed him. And Rachel. No contingent beneficiaries, no quiet payouts, no doors left cracked open just in case they decided to care again someday. Her hand shook only once. Not when she deleted their names, but when the screen blinked a confirmation line. "Are you sure you want to proceed? These changes are permanent." Yes, she clicked. It always had been. Later that night, she opened a fresh folder on her desktop. Emotional receipts location. Private access. Encrypted inside. She copied her own document, Why the Trust is Empty, and added a new one. Gaslighting timeline, 2010 to present, internal use only. Another, things I remember exactly as they happened, not open for debate. She paused before the next title, then typed, Amy Caldwell, Known interference, 2013 incident, Lake House, unclosed. She didn't open the memory, not yet. But the name sat like frost on the edge of the folder. Frida showed up at dusk, wrapped in a burgundy scarf, 2 tacos, and a bottle of red in hand. Tonight, she said, we eat like women who've buried liars with paperwork. Marilyn snorted. I'm officially more organized than the IRS. Frida raised her taco in mock salute. At this point, your documentation should win a Pulitzer. They ate on the porch again, colder this time. Marilyn had pulled out the space heater, and it hummed between them like a low, reassuring growl. The streetlights blinked on as the wind shifted, dry and unforgiving. You sure you're up for what's next? Frida asked. I'm past the point of up for it, Marilyn replied. I'm already in it. Silence stretched out again, not uncomfortable, just full, like a breath held between verdicts. Marilyn's phone buzzed. She didn't check it until the second vibration came with a screen flash. This one wasn't from David. It was from her bank. Unusual Logan attempt. Flagged location, Lake Harmony, PA. Frida saw her expression change. What is it? Marilyn turned the phone so she could read it. Frida's jaw tensed. I know, Marilyn said, standing, voice low. That's the lake house. And for the first time in over a decade, the past wasn't just knocking. It had found the key. It arrived in a plain white envelope, no return address, postmarked from Oregon. The handwriting was unmistakable. Wide loops, blue ink, the kind of script that still carried the weight of thank you notes and handwritten sympathy cards. Marilyn opened it slowly, carefully. Not because she feared what it might say, but because Lena's voice was always best unwrapped. I know you never asked for this, but you saved me. The day you picked me up from that campus bench after my mother's funeral, you didn't say anything profound. You handed me a sandwich and said, "This won't fix it, but starving won't help either." And I believed you. You never judged me. Not for the way I grieved. Not for the times I went silent. You just stayed. I saw what David did to you. I saw what you survived. I saw what you chose to survive. So this is just to say, I'm watching, I'm learning, and I'm grateful. More than you know. Thank you for teaching me that dignity can be a weapon, that silence can be louder than screaming. You are the only kind of woman I ever want to become. With everything, Lena Marilyn folded the letter once, then again, not to hide it, but to hold it. Her hands shook for the first time in days. This was the only thank you she had ever wanted. Not from David, not from Rachel, certainly not from Amy, just from someone who'd been quietly watching and understood. The frame she chose wasn't ornate, simple black metal, glass cleaned twice before she slid the paper in. She hung it on the wall just above her desk, where the sun would hit it at 2:15 p.m. daily. She timed it. She liked knowing. By the next afternoon, Clark had the amendment filed. Clause is official, he said, tapping the folder with his pen. Personal property transfer, all journals, photo albums, handwritten letters, designated to Lena Rivera. Signed and notarized. She's the only one who'd read them without rewriting me, Marilyn said. Clark looked up from his notes, eyes softer than usual. This is one of the most thoughtfully structured estates I've ever managed. Marilyn gave a quiet smile, nothing performative. That's because it was built out of survival, not sentiment. He nodded like a man who'd finally stopped trying to romanticize the past. I'll file the safety deposit instructions tomorrow. Anything else you want included in the box. She slid the envelope across the table. The paper was thick, folded once, sealed in red wax. No name on the front, but inside, a single line in her handwriting. This story is yours to tell. Or not. It wasn't a gift. It was an inheritance. The kind no court could quantify. That night, Marilyn returned to her study, a small room with worn carpet and too many pens, and sat before her open planner. She had tracked every move here: insurance edits, trust restructuring, digital vault updates, every affidavit update, email thread with Clark, a full war plan built in the margins of lined pages. Now she flipped to the final entry. The square for Thursday was filled. Sign final authorization forms. Confirm fiduciary shift. Burn Rachel's last postcard. Done, done, done. She reached for her pen to plan Friday and realized There was nothing left to write. For the first time since the unraveling began, there were no contingency tabs, no backup contacts, no scheduled tasks, no blank pages either, just a planner that ended exactly when it needed to. She closed it slowly, pressing the leather cover shut like a seal over her own story. Then she stood, walked to the fireplace, and dropped Rachel's faded postcard into the embers. It curled inward, blackened at the edges, then vanished. And just as the final ash lifted, her phone buzzed. Blocked number, no voicemail, just a one-line text. I was never the only one at the lake that night. The fire crackled behind her. Marilyn didn't move, because suddenly the past hadn't just found the key. It had opened a door she didn't know was still locked. The envelope arrived 3 days later, hand-delivered by a process server, wearing mirrored sunglasses and a neutral smile. David took it from the man without a word, his other hand still holding the mug of black coffee he'd been nursing since 5 a.m. Rachel stood behind him in the entryway, arms folded, sweater hanging loose around her frame like she'd shrunk beneath it. The envelope was thick, official, his name typed cleanly on the front. David E. Wilcox. R.E. Wilcox Family Living Trust. Disclosure copy legal seals, weighty bond paper, the scent of ink and formal expectation rising from inside as he peeled it open. He recognized the structure immediately. Title page, Wilcox Family Living Trust. Primary beneficiary, David E. Wilcox. Dated, certified, sealed. Rachel leaned closer. There it is. He flipped to the next page, chest tightening, and then the next, and the next. Line after line of legal correctness, clear formatting, unambiguous phrasing. Until page 6. He blinked at the balance field, lips parting in quiet confusion. Trust fund balance, 0 Z tort sewer row. Assets redistributed per addendum C, private. Rachel squinted. That can't be right. He turned to the last few pages, looking for an error. Something that would say, this is temporary or pending processing. But each section confirmed the same thing, structure preserved, format intact, beneficiary unchanged, with no financial content whatsoever, just an exquisitely hollow shell. Rachel grabbed the folder, scanning. There's got to be an appendix or something redacted. A holding clause? David didn't answer. He was already dialing Clark Hines. The phone rang twice, then a receptionist picked up. Polite, professional, with a script too perfectly neutral. Clark Hines and Associates. How may I help you? I need to speak to Clark, David said, voice already sharp. This is David Wilcox. He prepared the family trust. I'm aware, Mr. Wilcox. Unfortunately, Mr. Hines is in court this afternoon. Can I direct your concern to someone else? I need clarification. The packet I just received. It lists me as primary beneficiary but shows a 0 balance. That's obviously incorrect. There was the faint sound of keyboard tapping. No, sir, that's correct. Your designation as beneficiary remains. However, no assets are currently assigned to your portion of the trust. His jaw locked. Excuse me? The legal structure has been preserved for visibility, but per addendum C, all assets have been redistributed. As of last month. Fully authorized, fully filed. Rachel mouthed, "What's she saying?" But he ignored her. So what? This is just for show? A stage prop? I can't speak to intent, Mr. Wilcox, only accuracy. And this disclosure is accurate. He hung up without thanking her. The call ended with a sterile click. Rachel set the folder down slowly. This must be a mistake. It's not, David said, already opening his laptop. Estate portal, username, Dwilcox. Password. The same one he'd used for 10 years. Access denied. He tried again, slower this time. Access denied. Try the bank, Rachel said, but it was a whisper now. Her confidence wilted in the corner of the room, where it had retreated somewhere between page 6 and the end. David stood abruptly, walked to the wall, beside the entryway, the place where the thermostat used to hang until he'd yanked it out during a remodel. His hand curled into a fist and smashed into the drywall just beneath the frame. The thud echoed through the house. A fine line of white dust rained down onto the baseboard. Rachel didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She just stared at the folder, one finger resting lightly on the embossed Clark Hines and Associates logo. like if she pressed hard enough, it might disappear. David leaned against the wall, chest rising and falling too fast. There was a ringing in his ears. Or maybe it was silence, finally refusing to be quiet. "She's not allowed to do this," he muttered. Rachel looked up at him. She already did. Neither of them moved. Then, from the living room, David's phone buzzed once. A sharp, urgent vibration against the glass table. He looked at the screen. New email. Subject: Addendum C. Access Audit Notice Sender. No reply wilcoxtrust.org. No greeting, just a line of text. The full record of digital access has been shared with Lena Rivera. Per authorization 18B, witness clause. Rachel went pale. Who the hell is Lena Rivera? David stared at the screen, but he already knew. He just didn't know how much she'd seen. Marilyn didn't reply. Not to the email, not to the text, not to the blocked call that rang twice at midnight and hung up before voicemail could catch its breath. She had already deleted the notification before the sound finished echoing in her kitchen. By morning, Clark had added a note to the legal file. The subject line was clinical. The content, damning. Attempted manipulation via third party. Suggest logging all future indirect contact. Pattern confirms breach of boundary protocols as outlined in Disclosure Addendum B. He included a bullet list of names: Amy Caldwell, Rachel Wilcox, and now, implicitly, anyone else David might weaponize in her silence. Marilyn read it over toast and black tea, her mouth absent of taste, her body calm in a way that no longer surprised her. She added one more document to her portal that afternoon. Medical Directive, update under Trusted Agent, Frida Jensen under Emergency Contact. Remove, David Wilcox. Reason, access no longer appropriate due to history of coercion. She stared at the form a beat longer than she needed to, then clicked Submit. The hospital's patient care team confirmed receipt by phone. "We'll scrub the record entirely, Mrs. Wilcox. If he tries to access anything, there'll be a lockout flag." "Good," Marilyn said. "I want comfort to be earned, not assumed." A beat passed. "Understood," the nurse said, but there was something softer in her voice now, not pity, just a kind of respect. That evening, Lena came by unannounced, her car crunching slow across the gravel, like she hadn't decided whether to stay or just drop something off and drive away. Marilyn opened the door before she knocked. Lena held a grocery bag with 2 cartons of soup and a bottle of sparkling cider. "I didn't know what kind of comfort food you were into. I used to think comfort was what you were handed when you cried," Marilyn said, stepping aside to let her in. "Now I think it's what you build for yourself when no one shows up." Lena smiled, small and tired. "That sounds like you." They sat at the kitchen table, the good one, not the fold-out she used for signatures and fireproof files. Lena twisted the cap off the cider. "She's in a spiral, you know, my mom, about the trust." Marilyn raised a brow but didn't comment. Lena continued. "She says the whole thing was yours to protect, that you let it die out of spite." Marilyn's laugh was short and dry. "Of course she does. I think she believed it belonged to David, and that by extension, you were the steward, the guardian of his legacy." Marilyn looked out the window. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. "She confused ownership with obligation," she said. "And I spent 20 years confusing them too." Lena sat back, her hand still on the bottle's neck. "She wants to talk to you. She wants me to feel guilty. I know." They fell into silence for a moment, the kind that hums with what's been left unsaid. "You didn't owe him loyalty," Lena said finally. "But I think he really believed you did. That no matter what he did, some part of you would keep him warm." Marilyn's face was unreadable. "That's the problem with men like him. They don't fear winter. They just assume someone will keep the fire going." Outside, a wind picked up, rustling the last of the maple leaves and shaking the porch chimes into motion. Marilyn stood, crossed the room, and checked her phone. One new alert. Not a message. A new guest access request logged on her estate portal. Denied. Already blocked. But the name wasn't David this time. It was Amy Caldwell. Frida's contact ID lit up her screen at the same moment. Incoming call. Marilyn didn't answer it yet. Instead, she turned to Lena and said, "Do me a favor. Pull the red binder off the shelf. The one labeled Lake Harmony, Incident Archive. Lena paused. You kept that? Of course I did, Marilyn said, quietly. I just never thought I'd need to open it again. She looked down at the still vibrating phone in her hand, then finally swiped to answer. Frida's voice was low. You're not going to like this. What now? There's chatter, Frida said. Rachel and Amy were seen together. Hotel bar in Harrisburg. Guess who walked in 2 minutes later? David. Bingo. Marilyn said nothing. Frida's voice dropped. They're triangulating something. A silence stretched. Then Marilyn said, Let them. But her gaze was already drifting toward the drawer behind her. The one with the old key. The real one. The one no one else knew still fit the lake house lock. And this time, she wasn't waiting for an invitation. By the following week, the storm had shifted from rumor to paperwork. Clark called first thing Monday morning, his tone clipped, the way lawyers sound when they're both impressed and slightly alarmed. I reviewed what you sent over last night, he said. The new clause language is formidable. Marilyn sat at her desk, the red binder open beside her, Lake Harmony printed across the front like a warning label. The key she had found in the drawer lay next to it, small, brass, unforgiving. Formidable, she repeated. I was aiming for final. He cleared his throat. The existing no contest clause already penalizes anyone who disputes the will. They'd lose everything if they challenge it. I'm aware, but this addendum, he hesitated, as if measuring the weight of her intention. It stipulates that any challenge automatically transfers all legal and administrative fees to the challenger, even preliminary filings, even correspondence. You're essentially turning the entire process into a self-funding penalty. Marilyn smiled faintly. Then they'll pay for the privilege of misunderstanding me. Clark exhaled. This isn't a deterrent, Marilyn. This is... He searched for the word, then found it, almost with admiration. Legal concrete. That's what I wanted, he paused. Would you like me to read it back? No need. I wrote every word. Her cursor blinked on the document she'd titled Addendum D, Contest and Consequence. Each line precise, surgical, devoid of emotion. Emotion was for people who didn't win wars quietly. When she hung up, Lena was already at the table, notebook in hand, pretending to study but really just waiting for Marilyn to speak. You've been listening, Marilyn said, without looking up. Only enough to know you just built a wall out of words, Lena replied, smiling. That's so you. Marilyn finally turned, softening just a little. A wall keeps things out, but it also keeps things in. That's what they never understand. Lena closed her notebook. Then what's next? Marilyn didn't answer immediately. She walked to the file cabinet, unlocked the bottom drawer, and slid out a plain manila folder, unmarked except for a single label across the top in her handwriting. My voice, not theirs. She placed it on the desk, beside the binder. It's a sealed file, Marilyn said. For the record, to be opened only if someone tries to rewrite what happened. What's inside? Everything they'd rather forget. Statements, letters, transcripts, proof. Lena tilted her head. You trust Clark with it. I trust Clark to keep it sealed, Marilyn said. I trust Frida to know when it needs to be opened. As if on cue, Frida stepped through the open front door, arms full of envelopes and the smell of rain clinging to her coat. You summoned the cavalry, she said, shaking her umbrella. I needed a second witness, Marilyn said. And a friend who doesn't flinch. Frida took the folder, flipping it open just enough to read the first page. Her expression changed. Not surprise, not even shock. Just deep understanding. Jesus, Mel, she said quietly. You left nothing to interpretation. Or to them. That's the point, Marilyn said. They made stories out of my silence. I'm just making sure my words get the final say. Frida set the folder down carefully, as though it might detonate if handled without respect. I'll hold the duplicate, she said. Clark can keep his clean copy. Yours stays here, sealed. Good, Marilyn said. Let's make sure the truth can't be misfiled. Lena watched them both. Two women who'd stopped mistaking strength for cruelty. You really think they'll still come for it? They always do, Marilyn said. The ones who've never built anything of their own will always come clawing for what's left of yours. The rain outside thickened. a steady percussion against the windows. Frida looked out at it, her voice low. "So this is the endgame, huh?" Marilyn shook her head. "No, this is the documentation." She slid the folder into the lockbox beside her desk, turned the key once, and listened for the click. Final. Then her computer pinged. A new notification from the estate portal. Activity detected. Archive folder. External download attempt. Flagged IP. Lake Harmony, PA. Her jaw tightened. Frida leaned closer to the screen. "That's not possible. You revoked access." "I did," Marilyn said, eyes narrowing. Lena's voice dropped to a whisper. "Then who's still trying to get in?" Marilyn didn't answer. She reached for the small brass key on her desk, thumb grazing its worn edge, the metal warm from her touch. "The only person," she said finally, "who never needed permission." Outside, thunder rolled low and close, as if the lake itself had just stirred. The email came at 7:04 a.m., masked as a routine inquiry. Subject line: Trust Adjustment Request, Status Clarification. No sender signature, just the words: "Please confirm whether any changes are anticipated to the Wilcox Family Trust distribution schedule." No names, no direct accusations. Just enough vagueness to be legally slippery. Enough nerve to test the wall Marilyn had so carefully built. Mel Abbott handled it before Marilyn even saw it. Her reply was clean, clipped, the kind of tone that makes judges nod and challengers quietly back away. "There is no anticipated change. File is permanent. Please refer to the certified record on file with the county registrar. This correspondence will be logged." Then she added the last line, just beneath her signature. "Further requests will be redirected through formal discovery channels." It was the kind of professional kill shot Marilyn had grown to admire, a no delivered so politely it sounded like good news. By the time she opened her inbox that morning, the message was already archived under Clark's oversight folder. The game had moved, and Mel, who notarized 100 trust documents a year, had made clear she wouldn't be a pawn in theirs. Marilyn didn't even need to reply. She just let the silence work its weight. Later that afternoon, a small envelope appeared in her mailbox. No postage, hand-delivered. Lena's handwriting on the front. Inside was a folded card. The paper thick, hand-drawn with soft pencil lines and muted watercolors. A watercolor daffodil bending in the wind. On the front, "You've outlasted more than they've ever endured." Inside, a single sentence written in blue ink. "Planning something for spring. Just us. Thought you might need the idea more than the invitation." Marilyn smiled without meaning to. Folded inside the card was a photo. A little grainy, clearly taken on an old phone. The two of them walking around Lake Harmony years ago. Marilyn in her wool coat, Lena trailing a step behind, laughing, the sun low, fractured over the surface of the water like it hadn't quite decided whether to stay or leave. Marilyn reached for the black wood frame on the shelf, the one that had once held a photo of her and David at a wedding, long since burned. She slid the new photo in, careful not to smudge it, and placed it beside her original trust binder. Paper and proof, standing side by side. By the time Frida arrived that evening, the light had already turned gold through the kitchen windows. "I booked us a place," Frida said, dropping a travel brochure on the table. "Vermont, late April, fire pit, no neighbors, and a hot tub you don't have to share." Marilyn poured 2 cups of tea. "And," Frida grinned, "no family, just a view and your favorite books." Marilyn arched a brow. "That sounds like heaven." "It's the exact opposite of the lake house," Frida said, "which feels appropriate." They sat in silence, the kind that existed only between women who had survived the same fires and stopped apologizing for not returning to the ashes. Marilyn reached for her planner, not the one with battles, but the new one. Blank and unscorched. She flipped to April and penciled in 2 words. "Leave town." Frida sipped her tea, watching her. "Still checking the estate portal?" she asked. Marilyn nodded once. "Once a day, just to keep a trail." "You think they'll try again?" "They don't know how not to." Just then, her phone buzzed. But it wasn't the estate portal this time. It was a voicemail alert, no caller ID, the timestamp, 4:11 a.m. She stared at it for a long time, then pressed play. "You think you're the only one who remembers what happened at the lake?" Pause. "You're not." Pause. You're just the only one who wrote it down. Marilyn didn't move. Frida leaned in slowly, her face darkening. Was that? Marilyn didn't answer, but her hand was already reaching for the brass key again. Not to run. To unlock the past, this time on her terms. Clark insisted on a witness. Always did when there was history. The conference room was immaculate. Glass walls, no art, no warmth. Every sound, from the soft buzz of the HVAC to the shuffle of legal paper, felt amplified. David sat at the far end of the table, arms crossed, jaw tight. His reflection in the glass made him look smaller than he wanted to be. Clark entered with his assistant, Mel Abbott, trailing quietly behind him, clipboard in hand, composure like armor. "Mr. Wilcox," Clark said, his tone even but lined with fatigue. "Thank you for coming in." "I wasn't given much of a choice, was I?" David said. Clark didn't bother replying. He placed a manila folder on the table, opened it, and slid a single document across the polished surface. It was printed on heavy paper, the kind reserved for declarations that never get undone. Across the top, in clean serif type, it read, "Intent Statement, Marilyn E. Wilcox." Mel spoke first, reading from the certification clause. This statement reaffirms the finality of asset distribution under Addendums C and D, and asserts no further modifications will be made during the declarant's lifetime. David didn't reach for it right away. His fingers twitched near the paper, like it might burn. "So that's it, huh? This is her last word?" Clark folded his hands. "Legally speaking, yes. It's the final confirmation of her intent. It leaves nothing open to revision." David leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Is there any scenario where it could change? Say, if she—" He hesitated, searching for leverage he no longer had. "Had a change of heart. People reconsider things. She's, 72 now?" Clark's tone stayed professional, but the steel beneath it was unmistakable. "There's no scenario where your portion gains value, Mr. Wilcox. None." David exhaled through his nose, a short laugh that wasn't really a laugh at all. "So that's the end of it. After everything I built, I get zero." "You don't get zero," Clark corrected. "You get structure, visibility. Your name remains on the trust." David glared. "An empty shell isn't structure." "It's what she left you," Clark said quietly. "Form without substance. The mirror version of what you left her." Mel's pen stilled over her notes, but she didn't look up. The words hung in the air, heavy and precise. David pushed back from the table, the chair legs scraping the hardwood. "You people think this is justice. We don't think about it," Clark said, standing. "We just execute it." For a moment, David looked like he might say something else, something dangerous or desperate. But instead, he grabbed the intent statement, scanned the signature at the bottom, and froze. Marilyn's handwriting. Sharp, unmistakable. Beneath her name, one final sentence, typed but chosen by her. "This document is not a reflection of anger, but of memory." David's throat worked as he read it again. Then, without another word, he tossed the page back onto the table and walked out. The glass door swung shut behind him with a hiss of air and finality. Mel waited until his footsteps faded before exhaling. That went better than expected. Clark smiled thinly. He just realized she didn't leave him out of hate. She left him out of understanding. He slipped the intent statement back into its folder, sealed it, and pressed his thumb against the lock on the cabinet behind his desk. A soft click echoed in the room. "File it under Wilcox, sealed and complete," he said. Mel nodded and left, her heels clicking down the hallway like punctuation. When Clark was alone, he lingered a moment longer, his gaze fixed on Marilyn's signature. For someone he'd met only a handful of times, she had left a mark deeper than most clients ever did. He whispered, almost to himself, "You really did win." Across town, the late sun washed through Marilyn's office window, catching on the glass edge of the black frame, the photo of her and Lena by the lake. She sat at her desk, a pen in hand, updating the red binder one last time. Under the tab labeled Trust Notes, Supplemental, she wrote in deliberate blue ink. Doyle Legacy, closed chapter. She let the ink dry before closing the binder with a firm, quiet click. Outside, the world was settling into evening. Inside, peace didn't feel abstract anymore. It felt earned. Then her phone buzzed. A new voicemail, no number. She almost didn't listen. Almost. You think that binder makes you untouchable? Pause. Ask Clark if he remembers the first will, the one you never saw. Marilyn stared at the screen, motionless. The lake wasn't done with her yet. The forwarded message came at 8:19 a.m. Subject line: FW. Just curious why your name's all over a trust that was never meant for you. Sender: Rachel Wilcox. Tone: polished, poisonous. Lena didn't reply to Rachel. She simply forwarded the email to Marilyn with a one-line note. No need to respond. Just thought you'd want it for the archive. Marilyn sat at the kitchen table, the red binder still open from the night before. The air around her was sharp with early autumn, the kind that makes doors creak and sunlight feel like a dare. She reread Rachel's email twice, a veneer of civility barely covering the accusation. It's strange, don't you think, Lena, that someone with no legal bloodline somehow ended up holding the keys? I guess some people inherit dollars. Others inherit stories. Marilyn let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. Then she opened a new message and typed, "You owe no one your inheritance. Not of money, not of memory, and if anyone tells you otherwise, remind them. I chose you on purpose." She hit send before she could overthink it. 5 minutes later, Lena replied, "I didn't get money, I got truth." Marilyn stared at the words for a long time, blinking against the sting in her eyes. The tears came slow, reluctant, unfamiliar. Her body shook once, like it didn't know how to do softness anymore. She pressed her hand to her chest, as if that could keep her from splintering. Frida arrived an hour later, unannounced as always, holding a tote bag of groceries and a scowl that passed for affection. She didn't speak until she caught sight of Marilyn's face. Still flushed, eyes rimmed pink. Frida stopped in her tracks. "Who do I need to flatten?" Marilyn shook her head, laughing softly through the tears. "No one, not this time." Frida set the bag down and sat across from her, her voice gentler now. "Talk to me." Marilyn slid the phone across the table, Lena's message still open. Frida read it, lips curving into something proud and quiet. "You raised a woman who doesn't need your bank account," she said. "Just your backbone." Marilyn folded her hands over the table. "I didn't raise her." "You did," Frida said. "Not with permission, with example." The room went still again, the kind of silence that doesn't demand to be filled. Eventually, Marilyn stood, walked to the study, and retrieved a leather folder she hadn't touched in months. Final directives. Personal copy. She opened it to the last page. The section marked posthumous wishes. Optional notes was still blank. She uncapped her pen and wrote, "Nothing withheld, nothing regretted, nothing left to revise." She signed her name beneath it. Not the rushed scrawl of someone finishing a form, but the steady, unflinching hand of someone who had finished a life on her terms. Frida leaned in the doorway, watching. "You're done, aren't you?" Marilyn closed the folder. "Almost." She tucked it into the fireproof box, beside my voice, not theirs, and the framed photo from the lake. The wind outside had picked up. A storm was coming. And then, as if conjured by the thought, her phone buzzed. A new text. Unknown number, just 4 words. "He's already at Harmony." Marilyn didn't ask who sent it. She just reached for the brass key. And this time, she packed gloves. The snow came early that year. Heavy flakes drifted down outside the window in slow, lazy spirals, blanketing the backyard in silence. Marilyn sat in her reading chair by the window, one hand around a mug of bitter black coffee, the other resting on the arm of the chair like it had nowhere else to be. No messages, no calls, no drama. Just peace. The kind that doesn't arrive with fanfare, but settles into your bones like a secret finally kept. Her planner sat closed on the table beside her, not because she'd forgotten anything, because she hadn't scheduled anything. For the first time in decades, the holidays were hers. No garland, no tree, no carefully worded text threads about who's bringing dessert or how to politely tolerate dysfunction. The square for December 25th was blank. So was the one for New Year's, by choice, and it felt like winning. Earlier that morning, she'd written a check. Not a performative one, not the kind of legacy splash people gossip about at wakes. Just a quiet, folded rectangle of paper placed inside an envelope with a handwritten note. The memo line read, "To start your own story." She hadn't asked permission. She knew Lena wouldn't expect it. But this wasn't about money. It was about telling the universe, you may have come from someone else, but you came through me. The mailbox flag was already down by the time she stepped back inside. The air smelled like frost and freedom. Frida showed up at noon with a thermos of cider and a half-burnt frittata. "I didn't cook it," she said, "but I overcooked it like it's mine." Marilyn laughed and poured them both a glass of cider. Authenticity over perfection. They settled in for their annual not-a-holiday brunch. Just them, no forced gratitude, no apologies baked into casseroles. Frida reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. One Marilyn recognized immediately. The original Wilcox Trust file. Frida flipped to the summary page and cleared her throat with mock seriousness. Primary beneficiary, David E. Wilcox. Trust balance, $0.00 as of December 18th. Assets redistributed per Addendum C, private. Marilyn sipped her cider, brow arched. Frida grinned. "You know, I think this is the most elegant middle finger ever printed in legal font." They both laughed, deep bellyful laughter that left them breathless and glassy-eyed. When it quieted, Marilyn leaned back in her chair and said it simply, without cruelty. "He got what he gave me." Frida raised a brow. "Nothing," Marilyn said. "He just didn't think I'd notice." They didn't need to say it out loud, but the silence between them filled with the years that had sharpened Marilyn's sense of what was owed and what could finally be released. She'd spent decades preparing for the moment someone would say she was too cold, too calculating, but no one ever asked what it cost to warm the lives of people who only ever stood close enough to absorb it, not return it. Frida poured another glass and nudged her. "You ever think he's still sitting there, waiting for the number to update?" Marilyn smiled. "Let him." The afternoon sun slipped across the hardwood like a ribbon pulled slowly from a box. She stood and walked to the fireplace, one hand steady on the mantel. Frida glanced up. "You all right?" Marilyn nodded. "More than." She picked up a small silver frame from the shelf. Inside it was a photo from years ago, David and Rachel on a Christmas morning, unopened boxes in the background, their smiles stiff and waiting. She opened the frame, slid the photo out, and replaced it with Lena's card. "You're rewriting your own holidays," Frida said softly. "I'm reclaiming the ones they said I ruined," Marilyn replied. They both sat quietly for a moment, cider warm in their hands. Then, with a smirk tugging at her lips, Marilyn said, "My son said I ruin their every holiday, so I gifted him an empty trust fund." She took a long sip of coffee. "Best present I've ever given." The snow outside kept falling. But this time, no one was coming through the door, and she didn't mind at all.